Imagine a world where ordinary, well-adjusted individuals in a matter of days transform into sadists. Imagine a world where ordinary, well-adjusted individuals in a matter of days transform into sadistic tormentors or emotionally broken victims. A world where the very fabric of human decency unravels under the weight of assigned roles and unchecked power. This isn't a dystopian novel or a horror film. This is the chilling reality that unfolded in the summer of 1971 in the seemingly innocuous basement of Stanford University's psychology department. This is the story of the Stanford Prison Experiment, a study so profoundly disturbing it continues to echo through the annals of psychology, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, identity, and the terrifying ease with which situational evil can take root in the human heart. At the heart of this audacious and ultimately infamous study was Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a Stanford psychology professor driven by a burning question. What happens when good people are placed in an evil place? He sought to understand whether the brutality often observed in prisons was a product of the inherent personalities of guards and prisoners, or if the environment itself, the very structure of the prison system, could corrupt even the most well-meaning individuals. Zimbardo's hypothesis leaned towards the latter, believing that situational variables, roles, rules, symbols, and group identity held immense power to shape human behavior, often in ways that would otherwise repulse ordinary people. His previous research into de-individuation and dehumanization had already hinted at the ease with which individuals could engage in antisocial acts when anonymity or a dehumanized perception of others was introduced. The study received funding from the U.S. Office of Naval Research, which was keenly interested in understanding the dynamics of antisocial behavior, particularly in military contexts, to investigate conflicts between military guards and prisoners. To conduct this groundbreaking, albeit controversial, experiment, Zimbardo and his team placed an advertisement in local newspapers seeking male college students for a psychological study of prison life, offering a daily wage of $15, a significant sum at the time. From 75 applicants, 24 psychologically stable, predominantly white, middle-class male students were carefully selected, intentionally excluding anyone with criminal backgrounds or psychological impairments. These participants were then randomly assigned to one of two roles, prisoner or guard. This random assignment was crucial, as it aimed to eliminate any pre-existing personality differences as the primary cause of observed behaviors. The stage for this unprecedented social experiment was set in the basement of Jordan Hall, Stanford's psychology building, which was meticulously transformed into a mock prison. This simulated environment included small cells designed for 3 prisoners each, a narrow corridor serving as the prison yard, a cramped closet designated for solitary confinement, and a larger room for the guards and the warden. Every detail was crafted to mimic a real prison, creating an immersive and, as it turned out, terrifyingly realistic experience. The day before the experiment officially began, the participants assigned to the role of guards underwent an orientation. They were explicitly instructed to maintain law and order within the prison, but with a critical caveat: they were not to inflict physical harm or withhold food and drink. Beyond these basic parameters, they were given considerable latitude to define their roles. To help them embody their authority, they were provided with wooden batons, khaki uniforms sourced from a military surplus store, and, most strikingly, mirrored sunglasses. These sunglasses served a dual purpose. They established the guard's status and, more insidiously, prevented eye contact, creating a sense of anonymity and detachment that would prove crucial in their subsequent actions. Meanwhile, the prisoners were subjected to a process designed to strip them of their individuality and civilian identity. The experiment officially commenced with mock arrests carried out by real Palo Alto police officers who surprised the participants at their homes. They were charged with armed robbery and burglary, subjected to full booking procedures at the police station, including fingerprinting and mugshots, and then transported to the mock prison with sirens wailing. Upon arrival at the Stanford County Jail, they were systematically strip-searched, deloused with a spray, and given their new identities, inmate identification numbers. Their attire further contributed to their dehumanization: uncomfortable, ill-fitting smocks worn without underwear, stocking caps, and a chain around one ankle. The guards were strictly instructed to refer to the prisoners only by their assigned numbers, never by their names, a deliberate tactic to diminish their individuality and reinforce their new, subordinate status. Dr. Zimbardo himself assumed the role of superintendent, overseeing the entire operation, while an undergraduate research assistant, David Jaffe, acted as the warden, further blurring the lines between researcher and participant, observer and actor. From the very first day, the psychological impact of these assigned roles began to manifest. The prisoners, stripped of their personal identities and subjected to constant surveillance, quickly adopted a submissive and helpless demeanor. The guards, on the other hand, rapidly embraced their newfound authority, often with alarming zeal. The initial shock and adjustment for the prisoners were palpable, but it was the guards' swift and often aggressive assertion of power that set the tone for the days to come. By the second day, the simmering tension erupted into open rebellion. The prisoners, chafing under the arbitrary rules and dehumanizing treatment, tore off their identification numbers, removed their stocking caps, and hurled insults at the guards, barricading themselves within their cells. This act of defiance was met with a swift and brutal response from the guards. They retaliated by spraying fire extinguishers into the cells, stripping the prisoners naked, removing their mattresses, and isolating the perceived instigators in solitary confinement. The 3 backup guards were called in, further solidifying the guards' numerical and psychological advantage. This was not merely about restoring order. It was about reasserting control through psychological warfare. The guards began to employ tactics designed to break the prisoners' solidarity, rewarding those who remained obedient with small privileges while punishing the rebels. One guard was even overheard remarking with chilling conviction that these are dangerous prisoners, a testament to how quickly the artificial roles had become their perceived reality. The first casualty of this escalating psychological battle was prisoner 86 Douglas Corpy. After just 36 hours, he experienced what appeared to be a severe mental breakdown, screaming, "Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, and I can't stand another night. I just can't take it anymore." He was subsequently released. Years later, Corpy would controversially claim that his breakdown was faked, a desperate attempt to escape the experiment and return to studying for his graduate record exam, which he had mistakenly believed he could do while imprisoned. Zimbardo, however, maintained that at the time Corpy's distress was undeniably real and necessitated his release. As the experiment progressed into its 3rd and 4th days, the guards' behavior grew increasingly sadistic and dehumanizing. They forced prisoners to count off and perform push-ups arbitrarily, severely restricted their access to bathrooms, and compelled them to relieve themselves in buckets within their cells, further eroding their dignity. The prisoners, in turn, became increasingly withdrawn and fragmented. The guards' tactics of dividing and conquering had worked. Rioters began to view other prisoners as snitches, and the obedient prisoners saw the rebels as a threat to their meager comforts. The psychological toll was immense. Prisoner 819, for instance, began to exhibit severe distress, crying uncontrollably in his cell. A priest was brought in to speak with him, but the young man refused, instead asking for a medical doctor. As Zimbardo, acting as superintendent, reassured prisoner 819 of his true identity and prepared for his release, the guards, with chilling synchronicity, cajoled the remaining inmates into loudly and repeatedly chanting, "819 did a bad thing." The sound of his fellow prisoners condemning him caused prisoner 819 to break down completely. Zimbardo, witnessing this profound distress, released him and provided his pay. The fifth day was designated for visitations by friends and family, a deliberate attempt to simulate the outside world's interaction with a real prison. However, Zimbardo and the guards manipulated this interaction, making visitors wait for extended periods and limiting their time with the prisoners to just 10 minutes, all under the watchful eye of a guard. Parents grew increasingly concerned about their sons' well-being, particularly their access to food. Some left with the intention of contacting lawyers to secure their children's early release. It was on this same day that the experiment's ethical foundations were finally and forcefully challenged. Zimbardo's colleague, Gordon H. Bauer, visited the prison and questioned the independent variable of the research, highlighting a growing unease within the academic community. More critically, Christina Maslach, a psychologist and Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time, visited the mock prison that night. She was horrified by what she witnessed, guards forcing bags over prisoners' heads, a clear act of dehumanization. Maslach confronted Zimbardo directly, challenging his lack of caring oversight and the profound immorality of the study. Her most potent observation was that Zimbardo himself had become so absorbed in his role as superintendent that he was unrecognizable to her, transformed into someone she did not like. This direct challenge, coupled with the growing concerns from others, including researcher Curtis Banks, finally prompted Zimbardo to terminate the experiment the very next day. On the sixth day, the Stanford Prison Experiment came to an abrupt and necessary end. Driven by Maslach's objections, the mounting concerns from parents, and the escalating, unchecked brutality exhibited by the guards, Zimbardo made the decision to halt the study, far short of its intended 2-week duration. He gathered all participants, prisoners, guards, and researchers to inform them that the experiment was over, ensuring they were paid for the 6 days they had participated. This was followed by several hours of informed debriefing, first with the prisoners, then the guards, and finally a collective session where everyone shared their experiences. While Zimbardo later concluded, based on follow-up research, that participants experienced no lasting negative effects, this claim has been a subject of considerable debate and scrutiny. The American Psychological Association now mandates that debriefing occur as soon as possible to assess and mitigate any psychological harm, a direct consequence of studies like the SPE. Following the experiment, the physical components of the Stanford County Jail were dismantled, and the basement of Jordan Hall returned to its original function as graduate student offices. Zimbardo and his team meticulously compiled the vast amount of data collected, which would form the basis for numerous articles, and years later, Zimbardo's comprehensive review of the SPE in his influential book, The Lucifer Effect. Zimbardo's initial interpretation of the Stanford Prison Experiment was profound and unsettling. It demonstrated that the simulated prison environment, rather than the individual personality traits of the participants, was the primary driver of their behavior. This concept, known as situational attribution, suggested that ordinary, psychologically stable individuals could be compelled to act in cruel and dehumanizing ways when placed in powerful roles within a corrupt system. He drew parallels to the Milgram experiment, where participants complied with orders to administer seemingly dangerous electric shocks, highlighting the immense power of social situations and authority. However, the SPE has not been without its fierce critics, who have raised significant questions about its scientific validity and ethical conduct. One major critique centers on the concept of demand characteristics, suggesting that participants may have simply been acting out what they believed the researchers wanted to see, rather than genuinely embodying their roles. Psychologists like Ali Banuazizi, Siamak Movahedi, and Peter Gray have argued that the participants were merely performing stereotyped behaviors of prisoners and guards. Another significant criticism points to selection bias. Thomas Carnahan and Sam McFarland argued that the recruitment advertisement, specifically mentioning prison life, might have attracted individuals already predisposed to aggression, authoritarianism, or a lower sense of empathy. Perhaps the most damning critiques have come from researchers like Thibault Le Texier, who in his book Histoire d'un mensonge, The History of a Lie, asserted that guards were directly instructed by Zimbardo to behave in certain ways to confirm his pre-existing conclusions. Le Texier's claims, supported by original participants, suggest a degree of manipulation that undermines the experiment's scientific integrity. Even participant guard David Eshelman, known as John Wayne, admitted that his theatrical background influenced his role-playing, and he purposely devised ways to demean prisoners, including instructing them to simulate sodomy. Zimbardo has countered these criticisms by emphasizing that other guards, not influenced by Eshelman, also engaged in similar brutal behaviors, and that the experiment's core findings about situational power remain valid. He often points to the striking similarities between the SPE and real-world atrocities, such as the abuses at Abu Ghraib prison, as evidence of the experiment's enduring relevance. The ethical concerns surrounding the SPE are undeniable. The experiment continued even after participants expressed a desire to withdraw, a clear violation of their rights despite Zimbardo's claim that they could leave at any time. The psychological harm inflicted on the prisoners was severe and immediate. The lack of robust ethical oversight at the time allowed these transgressions to occur. However, one undeniable positive legacy of the Stanford Prison Experiment is its profound impact on ethical guidelines for human subject research. The study directly led to the implementation of stricter rules, requiring all human studies to be reviewed by institutional review boards, IRBs, or ethics committees to ensure participant safety and well-being. These boards now meticulously weigh the potential scientific benefit against the risk of physical and psychological harm, and detailed consent and immediate debriefing procedures are mandatory. Zimbardo himself became deeply involved in the aftermath of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in 2004, serving as an expert witness for one of the accused guards, Staff Sergeant Ivan Chip Frederick. He argued that the abuses were not merely the actions of a few bad apples, but rather a systemic problem rooted in the corrupting influence of the prison environment, a direct echo of his own experiment. This experience culminated in his powerful book, The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil, which further explored the parallels between the SPE and real-world instances of situational evil. The BBC prison study, conducted in 2002, offered a partial replication of the SPE with different findings that questioned the notion of mindless role-playing and instead emphasized the importance of leadership in the emergence of tyranny. While Zimbardo initially dismissed it as a reality show, he later acknowledged, in a joint statement with the BBC researchers, that both experiments offered valuable insights into human behavior, urging continued research into toxic environments. The Stanford Prison Experiment, despite its controversies and ethical failings, remains a potent and unsettling reminder of the fragility of human morality in the face of powerful situational forces. It compels us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the line between good and evil is not always clearly drawn within individuals, but can be shockingly fluid, influenced by the roles we play, the systems we inhabit, and the authority we are given or subjected to. It teaches us that ordinary people, under certain conditions, possess an alarming capacity for both cruelty and profound suffering. The lasting lessons of Zimbardo's experiment are not to condemn human nature, but to urge constant vigilance against environments that foster dehumanization, to question unchecked power, and to recognize the profound responsibility that comes with any position of authority. It is a call to reflect on our own potential for both darkness and light, and to actively cultivate systems and cultures that uphold dignity, empathy, and ethical conduct, ensuring that the disturbing lessons learned in that Stanford basement are never forgotten and never repeated. We must continuously ask ourselves, what kind of environment are we creating, and what kind of behavior is it silently encouraging? The answer, as the Stanford Prison Experiment so chillingly revealed, can define us all.